to you. You're listening to The Music Business Buddy with me, Johnny Amos, podcasting out of Birmingham in England. I am the author of the book, The Music Business for Music Creators, available in paperback, hardback, ebook format in all the major bookstores. I am a music creator with credits on a variety of indie and major labels, TV shows, etc. as a writer or a producer, sometimes both. I'm also a senior lecturer in music creation and music business. Wherever you are, whatever you do, consider yourself welcome to this podcast and to a part of this community. My goal is to try and educate and inspire music creators from anywhere in the world in their quest to achieving their goals by gaining a greater understanding of the business of music. Okay, so I always like to listen to those that listen to me doing this and get feedback. It's so useful because ultimately the reason I'm here is to try and help people and try and be of an aid in some kind. So I had some feedback about episode 11 where I talked to a media composer called Chris Ty. And a lot of people came to me and said, hey, you know, this was quite interesting. I'd like to learn more about production music. So with that in mind, I thought, right, let me try and find a media composer that's had a lot of success in production music, that does it full time, that can go a little deeper into it. So that's what I've done. I've found a guy called Jason Tarver who is brilliant. And he goes into immense detail on what it's like to be a media composer, how to get into it, all that kind of stuff. And he also starts by explaining what it actually is. So here is the interview with Jason, and I will see you at the end. First of all, Jason Tarver, thank you very, very, very much for being here and for being a part of the Music Business Buddy. It's great to have you here on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're a top man, top man. Okay, so let's go. Very often, Jason, when I talk to guests, we kind of sometimes jump back and kind of figure out, you know, where people started and that kind of thing. And we can do a little bit of that. But I thought it would be quite nice to just jump straight into the here and now. So before we kind of jump back a little bit. So, you know, as a media composer, you work with quite a wide range of clients, including the likes of Universal Production Music, EMI, Warner's, various others, and you've established, you know, composing as your main source of income, which is, by the way, a phenomenal achievement. Could you tell us a little bit about the type of production music projects that you work on and things that you're involved with and things that you enjoy doing?
Would it be helpful to your listeners to explain a little bit about what production music is, or is that a given?
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
So I think probably the easiest way to explain production music is like a little bit of a musical cul-de-sac, I always think, in the sort of overall music, you know, sort of cosmos. So production music exists mainly as background music for TV, radio jingles, basically any kind of media where you hear, you know, any kind of visual where you hear music behind it. Production music will exist. So reality TV is huge for production music. You know, 99% of the music you hear on reality TV is production music alongside commercial releases. So in the olden days, library music used to be referred to as lift music. Then it became library music, and now it got about maybe 10, 15 years ago, people started calling it production music, to get away from the sort of library music, I don't know, stigma, I suppose. And anyway, when you write library music or production music, whatever you want to call it, basically you either write a whole album's worth of material in whatever genre you're doing, or you write on various writer albums. And if you go on any of the production music websites, like KPM is the big one, used to be owned by EMI, now it's KPM again. Universal, so UPPM, their website's called. Warner's have their website as well. You'll just see thousands and thousands of albums, and they're usually 10-track albums. And they're usually 2 minutes to 3 minutes 30 length tracks in most genres. You don't really go outside of that. And what you'll notice is library music tends to echo what's ever going on in the sort of commercial sphere, or the real world, if you like. but it will function in a certain way. So I myself write huge amounts of pop music for library. So you're always looking at what's happening in the pop world, and indeed you don't have to look very hard because they tend to send you a lot of references that they want kind of not versions of, but something that sonically is in that field. And you have to kind of make that function like a library track. So a library track will feel like a pop track, for example, but it will do certain things that make it editorially more useful than a pop track. It will have, I mean, edit points are a big one. So you put certain little pauses, little things within the arrangement, little pickups that just help the editorial process and make it easier to follow a narrative. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what library music is, but it covers, I mean, it's huge. We do beds, we do songs, we do instrumentals. Um, yeah, it's
Wow,
ridiculous.
that's a brilliant explanation, by the way, Jason. I really appreciate it. And it's far more useful, coming from you than me kind of trying to pick it up and try and do a half explanation of it. So do you work with full songs as well, with vocals?
I would say 90% of what I do is full songs. But within the sort of like library structure of a song, you might not develop it as much as you would if you were writing a commercial release, for example. You would probably steer clear of doing a middle eight. Not that middle eights are particularly popular anyway anymore, but you probably wouldn't go there. And the main reason being is with a library track, you want to find, you want to hit your stride early on. You want to know what it's about emotionally, and then you don't want to leave it. You don't go from happy to sad or from happy to pensive, or you don't want to change the emotional content of it. You can change the dynamic of it, and you can change the ride if you like, and you can pull back and you can go more full on, but you don't want to change what it's about, emotionally speaking.
Interesting.
Lyrically, you can sort of be a little bit flexible. I mean, lyrical themes in library are another sort of topic. Um, but yeah, you kind of want to hit your groove and you want to stay there and you want to give them some variety within it, which in a sense makes it a lot easier than writing a commercial track where perhaps you want to take people on more of a narrative journey. Um, so yeah, you once you cotton on to the formula, it makes your life a lot easier. And it's a classic thing for people who start to do it, and I did it for years without gleaning this. Actually, that's what you want to do. You want to hit your stride early on and just keep going, because you need to look at how it's used. If you're thinking of endeavoring on a library career, sorry, production music career, tut tut, you you need to like look at how this stuff is used. And you know what, a really good piece of advice I think is that when you're dealing with pop music and library music and you're writing a top line, you almost want to think of it not as the top line, because the top line is the program, it is the narration. And a lot of music, this didn't used to happen until a few years ago so much, but on a lot of reality TV now, you notice that vocal tracks get used. They use instrumentals and vocal tracks all the time, but you hear more and more of the vocal tracks being used, and we as audiences just seem to have got used to this thing of hearing two voices at the same time. You've got the
Mm.
narration of the program, what's ever going on, and we can stomach hearing a top line singer sort of noodling away in the background. And I think a few years ago we couldn't do that as audiences. So you'd stick a top line on something to sell it to the TV people to make it sound authentic, basically. And then they 99% of the time use the instrumental. That seems to have changed a little bit, at least in the telly that I'm watching. Um, so yeah,
That's
yeah.
very interesting because traditionally speaking, let's say, I've heard other media composers have to, in the past, go, well, you know what, we've got this killer kind of top line background idea here, but we're going to have to replace those words with, a lead instrument, because otherwise it's going to conflict with
Mm-hmm.
dialogue and it won't be
Mm-hmm.
useful on an editorial level. But maybe, I mean, what you're saying there, I have noticed this as well,
Mm.
where you do have these kind of two voices going on at the same time, which, I mean, some people might struggle with, but many people don't seem to anymore in the same way they used to. Perhaps that's something that's changed in technology and the way that people consume these days. So is that a thing?
I think we're just used to being bombarded with information now, aren't
Mm,
we? We just
mm.
it's just coming at us, and we're just more accustomed to dealing with it. I mean, there are a couple of sort of tricks within it that you do try and do within a piece of music for media versus a commercial release, which is carve out space for a voiceover. So you might push things to the side a little bit more. You might carve out space around where that vocal would sit in the mid range. But it's very hard to to do that when you're at the same time you are trying to sell the publisher your pop track that sounds as authentic as possible.
Right.
So that, I mean, that is the challenge. You're constantly trying to weigh up those two things, like how usable is this to the end user, and how sellable is it to the publisher. Um, that's the challenge.
Very interesting. Wow. Really interesting. Okay. Let's explore the type of contracts that you work with in this world of production music. The sonics, the choices of instrumentation, and the arrangements play an important role in your work. But your work extends to sound copyrights as well as composition copyrights. So, how is that kind of reflected in the contracts that you see and how you're remunerated?
Well, I guess it's pretty straightforward in library land. I mean, you have three or four basic income streams, as I see it. Arguably, just three. I mean, the obvious one is the PRS. I mean, that's where most of the money is now. MCPS, yes, still exists, um, although it's dwindling a little bit, and certainly has been for the last decade or so. There is perhaps a downward trend, MCPS wise. Um, and the third one, which is perhaps a slightly more emerging source, is NR, neighbouring rights.
Mm.
So I guess as relates to your question, PRS, yes, as relates to the performance royalty, which is very confusing to people. That term, I think, performance royalty,
Yeah,
'cause
yeah.
it suggests performance, doesn't it?
Whereas if you performed it, but only once, and then it was documented and then
Right.
broadcasted, right?
Right, exactly. So let's think of it as performance of the piece of music, not your performance. Whereas neighbouring rights is your performance on said piece of music. And then MCPS, to anyone who doesn't know, is a payment for the use of the master recording, which will go directly to the publisher if you are published. So you will receive PRS payments from the PRS. You will receive MCPS payments via your publisher or publishers, and your NR you will receive via, well, if you collect it yourself, you'll receive it yourself, or if you go via an agent, like most people do, you will see it via your collection agent. And those are the main sources. The fourth one would be an upfront payment for your composition. And in the old days, when I got into it, that was a thing. And you would maybe see 300 quid or something for
Mm.
each track you submitted. Um, Quite quickly, since I got involved, quite quickly, publishers started recouping that payment. So I can't really say it's a valid income stream because you are eventually going to pay it back. But when there is, I mean, we call it an advance now. When there is an advance available on a track, yes, I suppose it is income because it's going on your tax return as income. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And
but
is that, do you find that upfront fee, if they're involved, that relates to the composition or to the recording?
It relates to both,
Okay.
really. It
Yeah.
relates to you delivering a product, and they won't distinguish much, which part of it they're paying for. The only time I've actually made money for a physical recording in that way was, and this is something you would know more about, was a K-pop project I worked on, and
Ah.
we sold the Pro Tools session to the publisher. Which I got, this is great. We're selling a Pro Tools session. I got hundreds of thousands more if you want to buy them. Um, but
Yeah, that's right. You had a hit with Twice, right?
I wouldn't say it was a hit, but we got an album cut, and
Oh,
it and it
that's
did
well, I would call that a hit.
and it did pretty good. It did pretty good. We still make a few shekels from it. It was one of those. It was a really good. I mean, again, you would know more about this than me because I mean that's the only time I've dabbled in the world of K-pop. Um, but it was a really good exercise in learning the value of a piece of music
Yeah,
versus the value of a piece of production music. Um, the amount of work we put in, I guess work versus reward. And we sort of came away from it and we were like, I don't know, production music seems pretty sweet after the work we put into that track. However, not as fun. Seeing
yeah.
seeing like the band that we did it for, do it live and all those kind of things. Like it's way more fun than, just a piece of music that disappears into the ether and may never, be heard of again. Um,
That's interesting because I mean, if you think, the skills that you put into it, they're exactly the same skills. They're just being used slightly different. Well, the
yeah,
context shifts rather
yeah.
than what you. But that's very interesting. But I suppose when it comes to K-pop, for those that don't know, we're talking about, large physical sales, CDs,
Mm,
DVDs, which seems somewhat alien in the West and
mm.
world, but that's a part of it. So which is what you were alluding to, I think, Jason. Is that right about the
Mm.
kind of the MCPS side of it? And
Yeah, I mean, we did see some physical sales for that early on. I mean, they tapered off very, very quickly.
yeah,
I mean, I think there was, when I look at the difference between what the single did off of that album and what our track did, just in terms of exposure online, and I mean, if you can land a single with a big act like that, I mean, that's you're laughing for a little while.
yeah.
Whereas ours was just a nice little top up to our sort of production music work. Although, funnily enough, our track started off as a library track, which no one
Oh,
really knows
really?
about. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, we wrote it for a production music library, and before we released it, my mate was like, I don't know, this sounds like K-pop to me, and so he kind
Oh.
of sent it off to a publisher, and through a contact he had, and that was that, and they went, yeah, 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 this is great. Um,
Wow, well, that's great. It's like musical intervention there from your colleague. That's
w-
brilliant.
well, it is great, but it also means that we've got no idea how to actually go about writing K-pop.
Because you did it by accident.
Because we did it by accident, and we tried to do it again, and we were hopeless at it, so we sort of gave up, went back to the library. Yeah.
Wow. Have you ever had the opposite of that where you've kind of written a song, like a song for the commercial world, if you will, and then repurposed it as production music? Have you ever done that?
Early on, yes. We've had a lot of tracks over the years. I mean, this is how it goes doing production music. At some point, you get itchy feet and you want to kind of dabble into other things and you think, oh, looks pretty good what's going on over there in the commercial world. So you do some work on it and you sort of come up with some tracks or whatever and try and push them. And a couple of years later, you go, oh, whatever happened to those tracks? And then and, uh, and then you end up, repurposing them and perhaps just sort of maybe, streamlining the arrangements and pushing them back into production music. The good thing about production music from that, uh, in that way of thinking is it does tend to be, I wouldn't say it's behind the curve, but the trends last longer. So there are certain things that you do in like with a pop track in production music that you just wouldn't do in the commercial world. It'd be way too like 10 years ago.
Right.
Um, and a lot of the references that come up on the briefs that I get, they'll have tracks from 15 years ago or from 2006, and then tracks that are up to date. And I guess a lot of that has to do with how happy music is at the time. I mean, music
Mm,
isn't as happy now as it was
yeah.
maybe 10 years ago. Certainly pop music. It's in quite a sort of, I don't know, slightly darker, more introspective place at the moment, which I prefer personally. But if you want to sell something, it's not, not so good. You need happy. happy sells.
Now that's a good point. So maybe that's that perhaps then to do more with mood than it is to a fixed point in time.
Definitely. Yeah. Mood and I would say more vibe when you're dealing with pop
Right.
music. Something like Beyonce Crazy in Love, that will be something that comes up over and over again just because it's got that really infectious groove and rhythm to it. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone gets bored of that so much. Um, so I mean, the other thing with if we're talking about longevity in production music, uh, there is something to be said for things with real instruments tend to last a bit longer. Um,
Ah,
so an acoustic track or a track that has a lot of live instrumentation on it tends to have a slightly longer shelf life.
because it
Um,
doesn't date as quickly?
because it doesn't date as quickly and because it's not time, I guess it's more that it's not time stamped.
Okay.
So dubstep, for example, came and went in a bit of a flash, and it came and went in a bit of a flash in production music as well. And it's almost like if I make something go whoa 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 now, no one wants that.
Mm.
They're not. It's just that's too. I mean, how long ago was dubstep? I mean, it's probably 10 years ago now when it was really
Probably
going.
more now. Yeah, like 2011, 2012. Yeah, there
Oof.
was a yeah, or maybe and before then it became a thing. But I hear remnants of it, like
Yeah.
I hear pieces of it still left and kind of sat in, I don't know, future bass or maybe even
Yeah.
melodic dubstep we hear sometimes.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
what you mean, the big warble stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind
Yeah.
of, I miss it. I really like that.
Yeah, it was quite there was something almost punk about it at the time,
There
wasn't there? It
was, it
was
was
there was
cool.
a there was an aggression and a roughness to it. I really liked
Yeah.
it.
Well, we'll be ready when it comes back, won't
Yeah,
we?
right. But you know where it one area where it left an indelible mark, I think, was in trailer music and hybrid trailer music. Uh,
Ah,
and a lot of that production kind of crossed over, I think. And you do hear that still, but it's just done in a slightly more, classy way now. And you hear a
right.
lot of that, almost sound design meets music kind of programming.
Yeah,
Um,
okay, but okay, so I'm just thinking of like action trailers and stuff. Very often you hear kind of orchestral hybrids that do that. They
hmm
might have some strings in
hmm
there with that kind of stuff, and it works. But car adverts, for example, that kind of
Yep.
combine the classic and the modern.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Very much so. Very much so. I think maybe I don't remember hearing so much of that before dubstep happened.
No, that's
So
a good point.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think a lot of the composers, who do that stuff took note and, have kept on incorporating it into their sort of sound palette because it
yeah.
just sounds great, that combination of,
Oh, it's
yeah,
beautiful.
as you say, strings and aggressive programming. It just sounds cool as.
Oh yeah, I hear it all the time on, especially on adverts for cars. Actually, especially if it's like
Mm,
kind of Bugattis or kind of cars that are like
mm.
right. How do we sell a Mercedes that's like modern and clean, but also kind of classic and sort of suitable for
Yeah,
James Bond or it's like
yeah.
well the answer's in the music.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's
yeah,
fascinating, isn't it? I mean, we've never, in terms of how we uh, garner our emotion in in sort of music for television or how we garner it as an audience. We've never. I mean, we there isn't another thing apart from an orchestra or a string section that that gives us that emotion, is it? I mean, it's been with
yeah.
us. It's such a part of our kind of musical DNA. There was. Have you seen? I mentioned this just because it was on recently, but
Hmm.
there's a David Mitchell thing on at the moment called Ludwig, and they use a lot of Beethoven
Oh really? Okay, I
references.
love David Mitchell, but I've not watched that.
It's worth a watch because the music in it is. I think it's brilliant. I think it's really well done, but it is there is a lot of it, and I know there was quite a lot of people who got annoyed by the amount of music, but I thought it was really good. Anyway, to me, it's a really good example of how the use of the orchestra and the strings really bring the thing to life and give it a personality and give it the correct emotional content because it's not screaming deep dark kind of it's not introspective, it's fun and it's light and then it makes you think and it's quirky and it's intriguing and the guy manages to bring all of that into the score. It's very good. I was really
Interesting.
impressed. But for someone who was wanting to take up film scoring, I would suggest that as a really good, contemporary example of something to listen to. I'm probably only saying that because it was on telly yesterday. But
That's all right, but it's fresh in your mind, and I think
yeah,
it's do you find that, Jason, when you're kind of watching television or watching films, that it's difficult to kind of just be you swept away by what you should be focusing on, the narrative of the film or the television? But are you kind of constantly thinking about how the music's supporting it?
no, do you know what? I think it depends how good the overall effect of the program is. I tend to not notice the music unless it's like really good and it just really catches my ear, and then it's a pleasant thing, or I notice it because the program isn't engaging enough, and my brain goes to, oh,
Ah,
what's the music doing? And then I just at some point after that switch it off because
okay.
it's not it's just not cutting it for whatever reason. Because it's kind of, it should be a 360 experience, right? The music is wrapped up in the picture, is wrapped up in the performance, is all wrapped up in this one bundle. And once one part of that falls apart, then I sort of start to notice the cracks maybe, and then the music becomes more evident. Um,
Okay,
but
okay.
yeah, but I know people who don't do that and who are very good at analyzing it, and maybe my career would be in a different place if I'd done that more. But I don't know. I just get wrapped up in whatever the film is or the program is, and I tend
Oh
to
no,
notice the music.
it's good for. Well, hey, listen, I'd say it's worked out pretty well for you, mate. You've done bloody well with it all. So, and also you've got the balance right there, right? You can still enjoy stuff and
Yes.
and
Yeah,
be
yeah.
human about it. That's if we get to, it's like sometimes if I go to a gig with a sound engineer, and they're kind of just, they're off duty and they can't switch off. They're
Mm,
like, oh, the sound's hitting that over there, or why haven't they dipped the EQ there? And let's go.
right.
Just enjoy yourself.
It can't be done. But
No.
I suppose, well, here's a question for you in that case. So, can you still enjoy music the same way you used to when you were, I don't know, 16, for example? Or has that analytical part of your brain kind of screwed it up a little bit?
Right now, at the age of 45, in this very moment, unfortunately, it is the latter. I hate to say it. I
Mm.
hope it. I hope it comes back. That's me. That's my truthful answer.
Mm.
I'm sure it will change at some point, but it's become so mathematical and methodical to me now, just on a sort of deeply subjective level, that I do struggle to kind of differentiate between it. Just because you can see how things are done. You look at
Yeah.
shape of that melody, or the inflection of that vocal, or the
Hmm.
purpose of the way that that's bowed, and you go, yeah, I can see why they've done that and why it works with this over here, and why. So yeah, I would love to distance myself from it a little bit further. Maybe I will in time, but it's something which I grapple with in this current era, if I'm being brutally honest. What about you?
Absolutely. No, same. Totally.
Really? Okay.
Totally.
It's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a real shame. It's a real shame to find that the enjoyment in music is where it's at. Mind you, I think there are things you can do. Like, I think there is something you can switch off from it. And I don't know, for me, I really like just playing guitar, for example, and trying to not think of it as something else, like trying to think of it as like exercise in my life. It's like going for a run or something, trying to disconnect it from the job and the process, and just let it be this thing that you enjoy doing
Mm.
in of itself. And funnily enough, since I started doing that, I find that bringing the guitar back into to work is much easier, and I'm probably a little bit better at it as a result of it.
Really? That's
Mm.
really nice to hear that. I find that very refreshing to
Yeah.
hear.
But I don't know, I think it's like, you kind of have to just turn that annoying thing in your brain off that's sort of, in work mode or in analysis mode, or, it's just how we're kind of wired and programmed. And it's just trying to find space, within that. Um,
Yeah.
to enjoy it a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah.
But going back to the film thing, I vowed a long time ago that I wasn't going to let music ruin films for me because I really like watching them. Um, so I refuse to overanalyze them. And
Well,
it's
good for you for sticking to your guns, mate.
yeah, yeah. Well, but then I suppose I'm sort of lucky in that I don't, well, or unlucky, I don't work with films. So what I do is a million miles away from working in films. Um, so, I mean, funnily enough, some of the music sometimes ends up in films, but it's not by design. Um,
Ah, that's interesting. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let's jump back in time just a little bit.
mm,
Can you, because you studied music,
hmm
academically, right? So could you kind of tell us a little bit about what that looked like, and then what your transition from that looked like into kind of finding work? Because you started out working in as a recording engineer, working in loads of different studios, didn't you?
yes and no.
Okay.
Uh, so I suppose starting with the degree, this was around, I think, was it 2000 I went to university? I think so. Or 19, no, I think it was 2000. So I went to University at Westminster. I did a BA in commercial music, um, and that covered performance and business. It was a little bit of production, although that was sort of slightly embryonic at the time. I think it does a lot more of that now. I certainly hope it does. Uh, we had the business school there was very good, the music business school. I elected not to do any of those modules, which was really stupid. I tended to try and do the fun ones, go and make some music or sound design for this advert or whatever. So in a way, kind of helped out. But I wish I'd done more of the businessy kind of things, because I've had to relearn all that stuff. We learned all of this, all the PRS, MTPS, neighbouring rights, maybe not so much at the time, but we covered all of this at university, and I forgot it all, or didn't turn up for that lecture, or whatever.
Right.
Bit of an idiot. Anyway, so after that, I tried to get a job for a long time in a studio. It felt like a long time at the time. It's probably only a year or so. I was writing a lot of letters, but I probably wrote 200, 300 letters, and I was sending them all over the place at the time. Um, I managed to try and get a job in a studio at the time when all the studios were shutting down.
Mm.
Um, so, it was like every month another studio's gone, whether it was Townhouse or whatever in London. So it was a bit tricky. Eventually, I got a job in a small project studio in West London, which was good in as much as it had rehearsal rooms, it had a couple of studios. One of them was just about big enough to do interesting stuff in, so we got a lot of different kind of clients coming in. Um, Started off answering the phone there, setting up rooms for rehearsal bands and stuff. Um, start Got into the engineering side of it. Wasn't hard to, because it was so badly paid. People would come and go very quickly through that studio, so it was quite easy to get your foot in the door and start doing sessions. Um, and you didn't have anyone helping you. You didn't have an assistant once you were running sessions, so you did everything, which was good in terms of cutting your teeth, but a little bit stressful. Um, and we used to have a lot of what was really good for me was we had a lot of weekend bands who'd come in, a lot of indie bands at the time, and they'd be doing their 2 days, Saturday, Sunday, record a demo, 2 or 3 tracks, or whatever it was. Usually an unrealistic amount of work for 2 days, and you'd bang it out. So for me, it was good because I got to record a lot of drum kits, got to record lots of guitars, got to record lots of vocalists, and I probably made a terrible mess of a lot of it, thinking back. But I sort of gradually got better at it, and it was good actually, because it was around that time that there was more and more information available online. People were really starting to share a lot of stuff, so you could get quite good quite quickly by reading, and by then going back and experimenting. Because I don't know, I mean, you can read a lot about recording things, but you really do need to stick a microphone in front of stuff and you know learn to hear what it's doing. And so it was very good for all of that. Then I sort of started to get a bit more freelance work, a lot through some of the people that came into that studio, because they would sort of take you away and say, well, I like you, but I don't like the studio, or I don't like the whatever. So they'd sort of take you to go and work somewhere else. So I got to go and work in some nice studios. We did some stuff at Real World once. That was really
Oh,
nice.
wow. Nice. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
did a few sessions there. That was great. And when I think about it, I really had no business being there, in terms of my career.
You're so modest.
But it's true, because there were guys who were working there who, really worked their way up and worked with some heavyweight producers and stuff. And I'd sort of sidestepped that a little bit. Not because I didn't want to do that. I really did want to do that at the time, but it just wasn't available, I couldn't land one of those gigs. Um, so I sort of felt like I was kind of making it up as I went along. But there were lots of things that came along at the time. I mean, Pro Tools hadn't just come along, it'd been around for ages, but learning Pro Tools at the time made that a lot easier. You could go from studio to studio without having to learn each different console, and
Yeah.
you could work with the in-house assistant and get a session running pretty quickly and get what you wanted out of it. I think Metropolis, we went to Metropolis at one point,
All right.
and I
Wow.
and I remember, I'd never worked in a studio that had, a large console, large format console like an SSL, like a G series. Um, so I knew the geography of it. I knew where everything had to go, but I didn't have hours and hours of experience. So that was where I would work quite closely with the in-house dudes and just say that you got to help me out here.
Yeah.
um, you know, but we could do things like, we would, I could run all the headphone sends through Pro Tools or whatever, and I would literally
Okay.
just be using the desk as for the preamps, and for
Yeah.
monitoring, which is pretty much what everyone's ended up doing now anyway. So,
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's a funny one. I was an ex-student of mine was using the G series desk the other day. He said, "Oh, I went to a session, Johnny. I said, had to use a G series," and I was like, "Oh, good for you. Wow, how did that go?" And he said, "Great, yeah." He said, "I knew how to use it because I've used the plugins for years."
yeah.
He said, "So really, the only thing that was difficult was like the patching and stuff." He said, "Never had to do
Yeah.
that before." I was like, "Oh, right, that's an interesting
Yeah.
insight to the times, isn't it?" But
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, apart from the really nice top end studios around London that we did a few bits and pieces in, um, I mean, I got very annoyed with studios sort of by the time I stopped working in them a lot, mainly because they were getting a little bit run down, and
mm,
I did quite a few sessions overseas and stuff, and the amount of hours that we would lose to dodgy channels or ghosts in the machine, and it was always to do with maintenance and upkeep,
yeah,
and you were just chasing your tail the whole time. And what I really like now about working at home and working in my studio is I don't have any of that. It's all so
yeah,
simple,
yeah,
and if there is a buzz, I can usually find it quite quickly. It's
yeah,
not, it's just we don't have to deal with that anymore. But at some point, it'd be nice to go into a big studio again because it is really fun and do really enjoy it. Um, occasionally,
yeah.
occasionally we have done things where we go over to with production music where we go over to Budapest or somewhere and do like string sessions because everyone records their strings over there a lot cheaper. um and they're
Ah,
probably doing it in the commercial world as well, to be fair. But you tend to get, you do these sessions where you get 20 minutes to record the string part for your track. It's like 20 minutes ain't a lot of time to do that.
wow,
um
no,
so anyway, but with reference to what we were talking about, it is nice to go back into, a big studio with,
oh yeah.
50
But
players.
but then again, so many big studios, like Abbey Road, for example, so much of the kind of bread and butter work that's in there these days is like big orchestras recording sample libraries and stuff,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That
100%.
can then be accessed by anyone to use.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
I think they do, from what I've seen, they do a huge amount of content creation as well, don't they? They do some very
yeah,
high end stuff and it looks and sounds amazing. But I don't know how much of the, their bread and butter is just straight up recording work. Can't be much.
no, I wouldn't have thought so. No. Okay, so in the that kind of era, you're, starting to kind of be thrown in at the deep end, working as an engineer. You, in addition to kind of, being a composer and whatnot, you've worked on some pretty big artist projects, with big producers and stuff as an engineer, the likes of Kylie and Mel C and people like that. So you obviously kind of, you know, as modest as you are, Jace, you must have kind of stumbled across like, okay, I figured this out, and now producers want to have me as a, you see, that was must have been interesting to kind of do that.
Yeah, well, I think I just got a bit lucky with a couple of people I worked with. Because, but it's true, I wasn't working day in day out with different producers. There was a couple that I worked with that did do good big things like that. I think if there was one thing that I think I was good at, and I hope I'm still good at it. If I had to do it again, is I think I have a relatively good bedside manner with people, and
Mm,
it's such a people thing once you're dealing particularly with people in the upper echelons, like, because you can't be a rabbit in the headlights. You've got to be, you can't be uh you don't want to be, kind of over the top and disrespectful and so self-confident. You got to find a balance. They are the star, and but at the same time you've got to meet them on their level, and be human with them, and
yeah.
and that's just, I think, bedside manner sort of sums it up. And
I've never heard that terminology before. I love that bedside manner. I
I
love
don't know.
that, mate. That's brilliant.
um, but yeah, for me, it always boiled down to like little things, like you go and if you can, you just chat with someone while you're making a cup of tea, and
Yeah,
it's just, how was your day? How did you get to the studio? Yeah, oh, traffic was awful. Whatever it is, because whoever it is, and no matter how big a star they are, you don't know if they're nervous or not.
no, that's right.
You
That's right.
assume they're not. You assume that they're just all over it because they're who they are. But lots of people just, they're not. They carry their emotional baggage with them, and you want to make them feel as comfortable and as at home as possible. And I think a lot of that is, you know, firstly, yeah, make them a cup of tea or whatever it is that they respect their sort of rituals that they like to do pre-recording. Give them space, but don't alienate them. I mean, it's always, the producer that I was working with at the time on that was good, and he knew, that it was always good to come in and have a chat, and everyone to kind of break the ice and feel settled in before you know asking someone to go off into the next room and record, because that's the worst thing. I think, someone disappears next door too soon, you haven't broken the ice,
Yeah,
and you start talking to them like we are now over a microphone with headphones on, and it's just, it's not, you need to have built up that little bit of rapport first, if you can, uh,
yeah.
so you can kind of have a little bit of chat with them, and and also you want to gauge if you can have a little bit of chat with them, because you might not, they might just be all business and just want you to shut up and record them. So you've got to kind of gauge that and find out where your line is, and I've seen that quite a few times. It's just people being misappropriate, I suppose, in the studio,
Mm.
and you can derail something so quickly,
Oh,
by
yeah, yeah,
and that's, it is, you're just you've got to keep the dream alive, haven't you? You've got to suspend reality for the time that you're doing the thing you're doing. And I can't remember who said it, but I remember reading a quote once, and it's really stuck with me. It's like, particularly when you're working with other people, and this is much easier to do when you're working on your own thing, but you have to believe that the thing you're working on is the best thing in the world for the duration of that hour or that 2 hours or that 8 hours, whatever it is. Just go into it 100%. It is the best piece of music ever written. And you may know in the back of your mind that that's a load of bull, but if you can suspend that disbelief for that period of time, then that's extremely helpful to the person you're
mm.
working with, I think. because you got to go on that journey with them, haven't you? You've got to buy
Oh yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah. I'm so pleased that you brought this up. I didn't think this subject would come up in our conversation, but
Mm,
the subject of kind of knowing how to behave around well-known people is something which is an important facet for any music professional, right? You know,
right.
whether you're a composer, engineer, producer, whether you're working as a runner, working at a festival, events, whatever. It's like there's just so many people that don't know how to behave around people that are well known, and it really, really, really must bug them.
Yeah.
Especially as a lot of people say the same thing to them all the time, and some of them get really tired of that. Like everyone gets in a bad mood sometimes, and you know, if the wrong person that is usually a very chirpy person happens to be in a bad mood one day, and they just happen to be near you, you know, those that are less informed can kind of go, oh, that guy's really moody. Like very often we, you know, people find out about what you're doing. They go, oh, what's it like to work with such and such? And are they a nice person? That's always the question. It's like, well, why
Mm.
wouldn't they be a nice person? Like, well, they're just a person.
Yeah, right. I'm
You
sure
know,
some days they're not a nice person, but probably
yeah,
most of the time they are. I think
yeah,
like
yeah.
maybe the best way I can think about it is you got to read the room, and if you got to learn to read the room, and you can read into that what you like, but for me it's like you just got to read the room. You've got to learn to recognize people's body language is obviously a huge part of it. And just listen to people. There is I've seen it so many times in studios and sessions where you know people will often start uh the conversation comes up and then like, yeah, because when I'm doing my music I like to do this, and they're not interested in your music. Like that's not that's not what we're here to do. I never
No,
forget working on a session and we'd finished everything, and at the end of the session, the artist wanted to just put on the music and listen to it. Let's have that little 5 minutes of glory, or half an hour of glory at the end of the session. We're just going to bathe in the genius of what we've worked on. And I think this guy knew that once the music left the studio, the scrutiny would begin. This was the one pure time that he might have to actually enjoy the music without all the voices of the record company or the NI guys, manager, whatever, going, well, I don't know about that bit, or I don't know, maybe that's too long, or whatever the criticism is. This was his shot to listen to it in its purest form. Anyway, I remember the studio assistant, after he put a couple of songs on, went, oh yeah, right, check this out. I did this with my band last week and started playing this song. And this artist just turned around and cut him down. He just went, no. And
really.
yeah. And it was like, okay, yeah. And it's like, yeah, because you're ruining his moment. This is this is his time to just kick back. And I didn't, at the time I just thought, oh, that's a bit aggressive. But, in once I'd sort of had time in the subsequent years to sort of think about it, I thought, no, you're right. This is your moment. This is it. You won't get another chance to hear it like this. So don't let the dude over there ruin it for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, good
Oh,
example. Dude didn't read the room and got shouted at. And
yeah. Oh no.
I mean, I'm just trying to think if there was. No, I don't think I ever did a clanger like that really. But
No, I can't imagine that you did. Do you know, it's just suddenly thought something. I mean, several years ago, I was on a tour. I won't name who I was with, but it was, someone, quite well known. And there was a promoter that had said to me, can you, on the way to this gig that you're traveling to him with, that I was the support act, and we were traveling together, and he said, can you pop round to my house and on the way through and just come and say hello and to my wife and stuff. I was like, and I said, well, that's fine by me. Let me check with this person.
yeah.
And he said, no, no, I'm not doing that. I said, why? He said, oh, because, he just wants to get a picture and like,
Mm.
I'm tired. I don't, and in my head at that time, I thought, oh, that's such a shame. Come on, you're better than that. And as the years have gone by, I get it. I get
Yeah,
it. It makes perfect sense.
yeah.
he was right. They
Yeah,
did just want a picture and say that they'd met that person, and that's not fair, right?
yeah,
So, I get it,
yeah,
and again, it's just the reading the room thing, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's and it's a very unspoken and assumed part of our practice. And if we don't
yeah.
know about it, we get it wrong, and we get it wrong quickly, and then either but we might learn from it, but then we might lose work out of it. So it's an important subject, and I'm glad you've
I
raised it.
I've heard this talked about before, though, by sort of much more people with way more experience than me, um, about getting into the situation too soon. And it doesn't matter what you are within music, and I guess this is this is across all professions, but thinking specifically about music, whether you're an instrumentalist, whether you're a technician and you want to be recording things, or whatever it is you want to do, um, you don't want to be overreaching yourself. You've got to get a bedrock of experience before you take that step up, um, and you're working, to working with, sort of more heavyweight people, I suppose, um, because you're just, if you're not ready, you're not ready, and you will make mistakes. I mean, particularly as a player, you don't want to be sort of indie rock guitarist goes into the room with, three absolutely phenomenal, Pat Metheny playing guitar. You're like, you're going to get eaten for breakfast. um, so, you've got, if possible, you've got to move up step by step, right? And learn all these little kind of, learn the intricacies of dealing, or the idiosyncrasies of dealing with people as you go along.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
because people are people, and it doesn't matter how famous they are, or infamous or not famous. Or infamous, that's something completely different. Um, it, you know, their reaction to how you deal with them over a microphone is probably going to be largely the same. How you
mm,
talk to somebody, how you, the classic one, isn't it? Is always someone's just done a take. You think it's not very good. How are you going to tell them when you're listening to it? And you're probably working that out while they're singing or playing or whatever they're doing. Because the worst thing is they finish and you have that awkward pause where they're like, was that any good? And you've got to kind of judge when you hit the talk back and say what you're going to say, because you can destroy them in that moment, or you can buoy them up and actually make them do something better the next time.
yeah.
So you kind of, I think you've got to learn that stuff by doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And again, sort of, if you've built up enough of a rapport with somebody, you can go, well, that wasn't very good, or that was a piece of whatever, and have a laugh about it, and they'll come back and do it better. But somebody else might not be, up for that kind of
No,
criticism.
no. Do you know what? That level of kind of there's micromanagement steps to that, I think, as well. Like
Mm,
for example, one of the things that I've kind of that softly bugs me. I barely talk about this actually, but is when you have engineers that want to get a billion tracks of everything,
mm,
and I'm like, no, like
mm,
if we've got three takes of something and it's not there, we need to understand exactly why it's not there and what we need to do to fix
mm-hmm,
it, because we can't just have the singer or the horn player or whoever just keep going and doing the same thing, because
mm-hmm,
it's really dull and uninspiring for them. So unassertive engineering of let's get another take for the road. My
mm-hmm,
question is why?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Have we not got it? How do we know we've not got it? We have to know in the moment whether we've got something. We can't just be a retrospective. Let's look back at the files next week and see if we got it. We should know
Right.
if and then it means that we're not having to put people through their paces too often and annoy them, or work past their peak.
Okay, so I got another question for you. So you're tracking a vocal with somebody. How many takes do you want to walk away with? What's your ideal?
Like full takes of everything in a
Mhm.
song.
Well, let's say just the lead vocal.
Three.
Three, yeah, yeah, I'll go with three. That's a good number. I go
Yeah.
three, four tops. Much beyond that, like I get sent vocals with, 8 or 9 takes. I'm like, I've got to sit through this now, and unless they're so radically different, um, it's just not helpful. I'd rather have your four best than your eight average kind of thing.
Yeah, unless maybe like there's, you've kind of, let's say you've got one that's, your best lead vocal in
Mm,
mono, couple of doubles wide, and then the
hmm
rest is some kind of low mix gang vocal or something. Fine, they can all be
Yeah.
used, but generally, I don't think that's necessarily all. It depends on the style of the project, doesn't it? But like, I don't know. I like assertiveness. I'm like, just give me less, or
Right.
if you cut it down or I cut it down, we don't need that many. You
Although
know.
I'm going to slightly contradict myself here and say that it can be quite helpful, not so much for the performance, but sometimes when you find you get to the mixing end of something and some of the particularly the breaths or the consonants or something just aren't gelling, and then I sometimes find it's very helpful to have multiple takes to go back and literally take micro parts out of. um 'cause I don't know, for me it's a process of whittling it down, whittling it down, whittling it down, and a lot of this stuff I don't hear it in the here and now, but I'll hear it once I've nearly finished it, and suddenly I'll go, "Oh, Jesus Christ, I've been listening to this breath that I suddenly find offensive for the last 2 weeks, and it hasn't bugged me, and now I can't stand it, and I've got to do something about it." But I think that's because, as you're going through that process of recording and then, arranging again and then mixing, you're removing problems, you're removing problems, you're removing problems, and that breath or whatever it wasn't such a problem when it was compared to these other big problems, but now it is the last remaining problem, and I want to do something about it.
Okay. Oh, that's
Uh,
interesting. Okay. Well, maybe I get that, right? I get it. Maybe I just got, maybe I feel like I'm too spoilt by Pro Tools because if there's something not, you know what I mean? Like if there's something in a vocal that's like not quite right, and I feel like I've got the best out of the person that's in the booth or
mm.
whatever. I think, okay, the rest, I can fix the rest,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
whether
yeah.
it's a melodyne thing or whether it's
hmm
like expanding something or shortening a vowel or what. We've got so many tools these
hmm
days that we're like, yeah, okay, I
Uh-huh.
can, we could spend 20 minutes trying to get that take, or I could fix it in two when you're not here.
No, 100%, 100%. So where do you stand on, and this is, sorry, I'm going to go off on a segue here if you've got
That's
time.
fine. Yeah.
But where do you stand on AI vocals?
But from a moral standpoint, is that what you mean?
Um, from a moral standpoint and also from a performance standpoint, like, would you use an AI vocal, and I guess I'm talking about vocal replacement, not generation.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I do have an answer for that actually. So, if it's for commercial release, no. But if it's to represent a song that's going to be cut by somebody else, then yes.
hmm Yeah, 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 yeah. That kind of makes sense. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because it's coming up more and more, certainly in the music for media world, where, perhaps 6 months ago it was, we mustn't touch anything that's AI," and suddenly I'm hearing sort of anecdotal stories about people being asked to use, an AI replacement vocal because it's going to be cheaper. I'm like,
Right.
oh, this is a slippery slope. Um, but again, I know lots of writers who do exactly what you're saying. Use it for the purposes of demoing. I mean, I've been sending session vocalists, pitched up versions of me warbling.
Yeah, yeah.
My co-writer, like a couple of little micey mice on the track. Uh, and for them, I don't know. Like, is it? I haven't actually had a conversation with one of them about it. I probably should. Do they prefer to have, sort of Tate McRae singing the guide vocal, or a version of, or were they fine with, with the Chipmunks? I don't know. And
That's a good question. Yeah.
I guess part of it is the the pitched up thing gives them a lot more freedom because whatever they do is going to sound better, right? Whereas suddenly, I mean, some of the AI vocals I heard sound pretty good. So I'm like, oh no, now they've got to compete with it. So psychologically, what's better for them? And I don't know. If it was me, I'd probably plump for the thing that I can easily beat and do a much better version of immediately. So I'd plump for the chipmunk vocal. Um,
Okay.
but
That's
I'm not a session
hmm.
singer, so I don't know.
Well,
Um,
one of the things I've battled with in the past, but especially as a songwriter pitching songs for other artists, is to not make the vocals too good on a demo. That's
mm,
going to sound really silly, but if I've got a demo vocalist that is really good and a better vocalist than the artist that I'm pitching for,
mm,
then it's going to present me a problem because
absolutely.
it's like it's a it's awkward. It's an awkward problem, and it's great because your song sounds as good as it can possibly sound, and you got somebody really perfect representing it. But then you go, do you know some of the stuff that they're doing on that vocal, the artist can't do that. So how's the artist going to feel when they have to sort of replicate it or reinterpret it, or like how's that's gonna be awkward at some point if they cut it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a very uncomfortable place to be put in, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to put anyone there, you know.
No, but that's kind of, isn't that basically why Sia ended up releasing loads of her music? Because
Yeah,
no one could
yeah.
sing it.
Yeah, yeah. Rumor has it Emily Sandé was similar to that as well. It was like, wow, who's this girl writing all these songs? Oh, who's this voice? She's amazing. Maybe she could be the artist.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
there's kind of I don't know. Yeah, it's a thing. Jason, I know you're a busy man. I'm gonna
yeah.
come to the final question for
Let's do it.
you, which is, and you've kind of inadvertently answered this a few times already, but what advice would you have for music creators that want to earn a living from their craft? That's a big question, I know, but what springs to mind?
Well, we touched on it earlier. I think you can't overstate the value of collaboration.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's really important. I mean, if I'm speaking specifically to production music, um, I would say most people starting out are probably lacking in one of the skills you need. You know, they might be a great writer, they might be actually really good at putting tracks together, but their mixing isn't all that. And that's what's letting them down. So go and find someone, you can collaborate with on the mixing front. Um, Probably don't feel like you have to be good at everything. That was something that I sort of struggled with.
Mm,
I've got to get really good at programming. I've got to be able to do all these different things. Like there's one guy I work with now all the time who's just really good at writing songs. That's what he's really good at. He's very good at lyrical concepts. Um, and he works with me and other people, so he doesn't need to be great at logic and at programming and at kind of beat making side of it.
mm,
um so play to your strengths really. And don't feel that you've got to do this, learn everything before you've got a shot at having a go at it. I mean, the other good thing about collaboration early on is you're not making any money from it, so you don't have to split your income from it. um, Also, when you collaborate with somebody, there's the camaraderie of it. You're in it together. You're probably going to push it a little bit more because you're talking about it with someone else. Whereas on your own, if you sort of have a confidence wobble about the material, it ends up dying on your hard drive. So there's that side of it as well. Particularly, I'm rubbish at networking. So if you're working with other people who are better at that, that's a good thing too. I did actually make a couple of notes of that.
that's a. I can't imagine that you're not very good at networking because you're
I
such a nice
hate it.
guy.
I really hate it. I get occasionally we have these. It doesn't happen so much now, but the publishers would, kind of do these big sort of end of year parties or whatever. Or if there's an event to go to, like I don't know, the PMAs or whatever, I always end up talking to the other composers, and we just end up moaning about stuff. And it's like, well, this was a failed mission, wasn't it?
Well,
So,
that's networking though in itself, right? It's kind of
yeah, yeah. I don't think I've got any work out of it thus far, but it makes me feel better. So, yeah, I don't know. I've just never been very, some people are so good at that, getting out and putting themselves about. I've struggled with that over the years, but um, I mean, another thing that I might sort of, if you're putting stuff out early on, you really want to get feedback from it as well. You want to get
Mm.
And there's lots of places where you can do that now that didn't exist when I was getting into it. There's some very good Facebook forums that pretty much anyone can sign up to that are writer forums. One that springs to mind would be Composer's Guide to Library Music, which was a book written by I can't remember his name, anyway, Dan's book, very good book, all about library music. Anyway, he has an accompanying uh, group on Facebook, and I mean it's got
Ah,
thousands of members, but it's very good because people do put stuff up there and ask for critiques and stuff. And they ask all kinds of questions. It doesn't matter how sort of basic it is or complex it is. You will get sympathetic answers to it,
that's
and
nice.
it's a very good resource, for someone starting out, I think.
Mm,
And of course, people will also, if you ask a relatively obvious question, people will go, "Have you read the book?" And most people say, "What book?" The book that this group is named after. So I would suggest maybe having a cursory read of the book before you join that group. But it's very good. So you want peer feedback really,
yeah,
and you got to accept it as well. You got to take it on the chin if it's brutal, and see it as a big learning curve, because no matter how brutal somebody's feedback is on there, it isn't going to be as brutal as somebody's feedback, or lack of feedback when they just listen to it and go, "Nah, you're not ready," or "We're not interested," and you've come out of the gates too soon, basically. And then, of course, you got to be persistent. You could be, the greatest composer, producer that production music has ever seen, and still struggle to get people to hear and to listen. And obviously, that is where networking comes in, and where putting yourself out helps. It's funnily enough, it's also where collaborations help. If you can collaborate with somebody who's already working with a decent publisher, great, do that. That's your fastest way into a publisher, I think. And
yeah,
that's how I've got into quite a few different publishers. I've just done a collaboration with somebody. It's not enough to do one, you've got to do a few, and
yeah.
funnily enough, even, and I'm thinking about Universal now. I've done quite a lot for Universal, but even after all the work I've done for them and other people, if I write them an email now, I won't get an answer to it. It's such a closed world. So co-writing really has been the only way I've got work from Universal. I mean, there's other publishers where I'm the person that they deal with, so it's a lot easier to interact with them. But my co-writers, if they write to one of those publishers, they probably won't get an answer. They tend to deal with one person within a group of
Mm,
people, and it's just because they're saturated.
yeah.
They got so many people they're dealing with. I saw on KPM, I don't know, was it last year? I got a circular email, and whoever had sent it out had forgotten to BCC rather than CC the group of
Oh my
people.
God. Okay.
Yeah, and I was one of 600 or 700 writers that they'd emailed out. And if you think I'm one of 600 or 700 that they actually email, I'm not, you know, one of the co-writers of those 600 or 700 people, or sometimes you see 4 or 5 people on a track. So you start to get a sense of how many people are, sort of contributing to those catalogs. I mean, there's just thousands and thousands of us doing it now. So how you make yourself cut through that noise is the challenge. And I would say collaboration is a really good way to go, because you're much more likely to get a result from messaging a composer, someone like me or whatever,
Mm,
and going, "I think I've got a really good thing going on here. What do you think of it?" And I go, "Yeah, that's really good. I can't do that," or "That's a genre that um, I'm not versed in. However, I can hear a million things that are wrong with it that need to be changed to make it work in this format, and I can bring, you know, something to the table as a co-writer that you can't at this point. So it becomes quite a sort of helpful collaboration.
ah,
Um,
that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
where I guess you're bringing your experience to it, and you can then steer the production and steer the composition in a way that's actually going to be useful. Um, rather than, I mean, that is something that people struggle with early on is learning the form, like we were talking about earlier.
Mm.
They put a great big intro on something, or they put a mid late in it, or just some of the things they've done in it aren't going to work in library or whatever. So that would be a good way to go, I would say, is, apart from approaching publishers or labels or whoever, sync agents, you might also want to approach um, other writers and composers and just say, look, I'm really up for learning and collaborating. What do you think? Will you have a listen to my stuff? And see if it breeds anything. All you
Yeah.
can do is plant the seeds, right? And hopefully some flowers grow. I mean, that's all we're doing every day with it. And the same, every piece of music you put out, you're planting that little seed, aren't you? Hopefully
Mm.
some royalties grow out of this one. And more often than not they don't, and the hit rate is
Yeah.
very slow. But you've got to throw some mud at the wall and see what sticks. No, I think that's about it. I mean, I would just say you've got to keep the faith as well. You've got to not give up
Yeah.
at it. And that's very easy to do if you're 25 and you don't have responsibilities. But if you're coming to it later on and you've got families and stuff, I don't know, you just got to find a way of making it work. You've got to put the hours in. You've got to do I'm a big believer in your 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
It just something clicks after somewhere around that amount of time, and you just get better at the thing exponentially. So and you just got to good luck, basically.
Yeah. Well, now, Jason, thank you so much for your perspective, your advice for others. Top guest. Thank you so much, mate.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I rarely get to talk to people about this kind of stuff. Lovely.
Oh, it's a privilege.
My pleasure. Anytime, Johnny. It's been
Thank
lovely
you,
to
mate.
speak to you. Take it easy.
Ah, what a top dude. I hope you enjoyed that. It's funny, isn't it? When you have a conversation with somebody and you kind of go, right, this is the narrative, this is where we're going to go. And then you stumble across all these other little bits and pieces and little gems and stuff. So we kind of went off production music at times and just went into talking about other things. I do hope that that was useful for you, as well as learning about production music, how to get into it, what to be aware of, but also some other little kind of lessons around the music industry and stuff. So I hope that's been useful. Thank you for being here. Until next time, be good and may the force be with you.